The Mueller probe ramping up and the lies keep piling up. We're going to show you what the White House is saying and how many times it simply is not saying the truth. Then the politics of the probe. Top congressional Republicans, they're either staying mum or defending the president regardless of what he says. Even Ronald Reagan's daughter saying her father would be appalled by Trump and Congress. Also, 8 months after Hurricane Maria slammed Puerto Rico, the island still has tons of problems. The death toll has soared to more than 4,000 people, according to a new report, and schools are a total mess, thousands without power or water. We'll talk to Ray Ramundi, who visited the island right after the storm. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We're going to do those stories and more this hour. So, just when you thought the Russia probe couldn't get any crazier, it got crazier. Team Trump getting caught in more and more lies as their own words are being used against them. Now, the rule of law seems to be, I don't know, maybe a thing of the past. The newest member of Team Trump, Rudy Giuliani, he keeps pouring gas in the fire. Here he is just yesterday on ABC.
Do you and the president's attorneys believe the president has the power to pardon himself?
He's not, but he probably does. I mean, he has no intention of pardoning himself, but he probably does. It doesn't say he can't.
The president, well, he didn't wait a hot second. He jumped right on that, where else but on Twitter. Quote, as has been stated by numerous legal scholars, I have the absolute right to pardon myself. But why would I do that when I have done nothing wrong? In the meantime, the never-ending witch hunt led by 13 very angry and conflicted Democrats and others continues into the midterms. The appointment of the special counsel is totally unconstitutional. Let's point out a couple of lies just in those tweets. He talks about legal scholars, but none of them are mentioned. The White House press secretary stonewalled today when pressed to name a single one. Then, of course, there is a claim about those 13 angry Democrats. What Trump doesn't mention is key here. Bob Mueller, a lifelong registered Republican, appointed by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Trump appointed Rosenstein, and Rosenstein also a registered Republican. All right, let's get back to Rudy. He was hardly done. In an interview with the Huffington Post, America's mayor, who is now America's apologist, he said this jarring quote, in no case can he, meaning the president, be subpoenaed or indicted. I don't know how you can indict while he's in office, no matter what he is. If he shot James Comey, he'd be impeached the next day. Impeach him, and then you can do whatever you want to do to him. Even Chris Christie, who will not be confused with a bleeding heart liberal anytime soon here, he disagrees with Giuliani on indictments and subpoenas for Trump. Here, the former New Jersey Republican governor, now an analyst on ABC.
There's no way that'll happen. And the reason it won't is because it then becomes a political problem, George. If the president were to pardon himself, he'll get impeached.
And that's not all. I saved the best or worst, depending on your perspective, for last. This could be the president's biggest lie since the whopper he told about the whole Stormy Daniels payment. You'll remember Trump flat out said he knew nothing about it. Then proof emerged showing that, in fact, he did know, and he's the one who paid. Well, the lies about Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with the Russians during the campaign should be in the Lie Hall of Fame if they have one of those. Here is Trump's attorney, Jay Sekulow, just last year.
Let's focus on what the president was aware of. Nothing. I wasn't involved in the statement drafting at all, nor was the president. But I'm assuming that was between Mr. Donald Trump Jr., between Don Jr. and his lawyer. I'm sure his lawyer was involved. That's how you do it. And you know that. And so to put this on the president, I think is just absolutely incorrect.
Okay, incredible here. The president, of course, knew nothing about this. Here is White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, also last year when pressed about who, in fact, was behind this memo about the supposed reasons behind Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with the Russians at Trump Tower.
The statement that Don Jr. issued is true. There's no inaccuracy in the statement. The president weighed in as any father would based on the limited information that he had.
Okay, both Sekulow and Sanders lying, not hedging the truth, lying. Now, the Times has proof. It just published a confidential letter to Mueller written by Trump's legal team. Someone leaked it, of course. Here's part of it. The president dictated a short but accurate response to the New York Times article on behalf of his son, Donald Trump Jr. His son then followed up by making a full public disclosure regarding the meeting, including his public testimony that there was nothing to the meeting and certainly no evidence of collusion. President, he dictated the letter, and that's what his own legal team has admitted. Oops. And here is Sanders today, refusing to even discuss the issue.
If you're saying the one thing from the podium that it wasn't dictated by the president, and his lawyers are saying something entirely different, contradicting you, how are we supposed to know what to believe? How can we believe what you're saying from the podium if his lawyers are saying it's entirely inaccurate?
Once again, I can't comment on a letter from the president's outside counsel. I direct you to them to answer it. John?
But Sarah, the words are literally, you said he did not dictate. The lawyers said he did. What is it?
I'm not going to respond to a letter from the president's outside counsel. We purposely walled off, and I would refer you to them for comment.
Rudy Giuliani, though, of course, he was there to save the day. Not really. Here he is again this weekend, digging the ditch just a little bit deeper.
This is the reason you don't let the president testify. If, you know, our recollection keeps changing, or we're not even asked a question, and somebody makes an assumption. In my case, I made an assumption. Then we corrected it, and I got it right out as soon as it happened.
Our recollection keeps changing. Let's talk about that Trump Tower meeting itself. The story, it kept changing after news of it broke. First, if you remember, they said it was all about Russian adoptions. But after emails were discovered, with Don Jr. admitting he was promised dirt on Hillary Clinton, that blew up the cover story. At the time, they said the Russians had no ties to the Kremlin. That also not true. This woman was a Russian lawyer who was the key person in the room. Time says she worked directly with Russia's chief legal officer on major cases in Moscow. Now, that's a ton to unpack here, and let's bring in former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel. And I could go on and on, Roland, but at some point, we've got to bring the panel in. Okay, we laugh about this, but sometimes it seems like it's Keystone Cops. It's really scary. The idea that the president believes, and is abetted by Rudy and others apparently, that he is completely above the law, that as president, no rules apply to him, subpoenas don't matter, indictments don't matter, he can pardon himself, that there is no law governing the president, there is no separation of powers in this country. We basically have a monarchy, or I don't know, maybe a strong man. I mean, that's basically, without coloring here, what the president believes his powers are, which are absolute.
That's exactly right. And Richard, the really frightening thing for the country is that there are so many of our citizens who seem to be quite complacent about the way the president is acting here. And when somebody like Rudy Giuliani makes a statement like he could have Jim Comey assassinated and, you know, pardon himself, that's a signal to people out there in the world that, you know, if you do something bad that is advantageous to Trump, you know, you may get a pardon. And, you know, it's very worrisome that some mentally ill person could hear something like this and go do something that we'd all very much regret. As a result, I mean, this kind of rhetoric is just out of control. Out of control.
And as you referenced, that dog whistle, I mean, we saw what he did last week with, you know, touching on the Blagojeviches and the rest of the world here for pardons is basically a signal. Any of you guys out there on the ledge, don't worry. Don't play ball with Mueller. I got pardon power in hand. But I want to come back just to clear it up. Yeah. Forget about how vile and how much of subverting, I should say, justice it would be. It's also wrong. I mean, the president cannot just pardon himself here. He can't decide if subpoenas apply to him. This is an opinion. We've kind of decided this in this country, haven't we?
Yes, you know, at least with the issue of a subpoena, I think that's a pretty well-settled issue. In the United States against Nixon, in the context of a criminal case, the presidency received a subpoena for documentation and the Butterfield tapes and resisted it, and the court system ultimately ruled that no, the president is not above the law, he must respond. In the case of Jones against Clinton, in a civil case, the president was subpoenaed to testify at a deposition in the civil case brought by Paula Jones. He resisted that. It went all the way up through the courts, and the courts ruled, no, you got to testify if you're subpoenaed. So on the subpoena issue, I think that's settled law. If he gets a subpoena, he has to respond like any other citizen. On the pardon issue, I think it is pretty clear from the context of the Constitution that the president can't pardon himself. Indeed, the exact language is that the president has the power to pardon except in cases of impeachment. Now, the only person who can get impeached in the Constitution is the president himself. So that indicates that at least with respect to impeachment, he can't pardon himself. And it makes no sense that a president would be able to pardon himself. He'd then be a king, and I think we fought that war sometime back in 1776 or thereabouts. So I don't think there's any significant weight of authority in favor of the president here, and I'd be very surprised if that issue came out his way.
You know, in a few minutes, I'm going to bring in my panel, Roland, about the politics of this. And I got to tell you, what I heard all this weekend from Congressman McCarthy, who may be in line here to be the next speaker, assuming Republicans can keep control of the House after the midterms, beyond frightening about the absence, forget about political courage, of just, you know, basic intent in observing what the Founding Fathers had intended here in terms of having some separation of powers. Be that as it may, we come back to that Trump Tower meeting with the Russians. You have to work at it to have that volume of lies by that volume of people systemically not only just changing their story, but just lying straight through their teeth. I think we did a pretty good job of showing, you know, the TikTok of it, but explain the significance as it deals with both obstruction or collusion.
Yeah, well, you know, the argument that you make to a jury as a prosecutor in a case like this is, even if the lies that are disseminated through the press and elsewhere are not themselves direct obstructions of justice because they are not necessarily lies directly to an FBI agent or to a grand jury, they are certainly circumstantial evidence that the persons whose lips are moving knew that there was something very wrong about these meetings with the Russians, and something very wrong went on in those meetings, and so there had to be lies told to try to cover that up, not just from law enforcement, but from the public as well. And it goes right to the president's intent in terms of what did he intend when he did lie to the press. He intended to try to cover up the improper activity that was going on with Russia and that he clearly knew about. He must have known about it to be so ready to lie about it.
And you also, if I could, Roland, you kind of connect the dots where that stray line that was caught on a hot mic by the president saying to Ambassador Kislyak, he said, basically, when he got rid of Comey here, the pressure's off us. You say that now all of a sudden we know the context of it.
Yeah, and you know what's really scary about that line is when we first learned of it, Richard, it sounded like proof that Trump intended to obstruct justice when he got rid of Comey, and it was that. But now, with the additional information we have, and the fact that Mr. Trump continues to refuse to do things like sanction Russia, do things like tighten our election process and other things, and continues to act for the benefit of Russia, that line, this takes pressure off of us, starts to sound like we're in the middle of a conspiracy with Russia and Trump, not at the end of a conspiracy to obstruct justice. It sounds like Trump was telling Ambassador Kislyak, okay, I've got Comey out of the way now, and we can really go to town in terms of what you and I can now accomplish, Russia and Trump. That's a scary thought, that Trump is really acting as a conspirator with Russians, even as we sit here now speaking to each other. Could be.
Very troubling times indeed. Roland, as always, though, thank you for helping us make sense out of the senseless. I appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure to be with you, Richard.
All right, coming up next, as I said, we're going to bring in our panel. Republicans in Congress, they're either staying silent or even some standing up for the president, even though the evidence keeps mounting here against the commander-in-chief. What happened to the GOP, which used to be the law and order party, and the party of Reagan? We'll discuss after this.